But happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy December. Crazy December. Um, yeah. Uh, things have been going pretty good. Um, we had our alpha day away. That was really cool, really meaningful. Um, and one of the things we got to do there was be prayed over in general, and also for like the Holy Spirit to come and be present in our lives, and that was really cool and really meaningful. We got to watch some uh, meaningful content and have some meaningful discussion, and it was meaningful. I like the word meaningful. I think it. Uh, I don't know. It's just important. Um, sort of thrive on a little bit. So yeah. Today we're gonna have a little bit of an interesting morning prayer. I shared a couple weeks ago about so my fish. My fish are one of my hobbies. I love taking care of things. Um, in some ways, uh, like I just love having a little creatures and seeing some of God's creation. And there's a morning prayer that I'm excited to do at some point in the future when I'm going to talk a little bit about how God's moved through me keeping fish. But today we're going to go talk about another one of Jason's pastimes, hobbies, whatever, and that's actually games, like video games, and specifically um, games that are really driven by a narrative. So they're kind of like a choose your own adventure book or story, where the game is kind of telling you a story and you get to participate. So you get to kind of like be a character. You get to be like the main character, or get to make choices for the main character. Um, and I think that's really, really cool because it lets it be interactive. It's not just you receiving something, and it's not just you contributing something either. You actually get to interact in a way with like the people who put a lot of time and effort into this game in order to share something with you, in order to tell you something. And so I think that's really, really cool. And I've talked already in morning prayer, and if you've ever heard me preach about, I love stories. And so when I preached about 2 months ago, I talked about the stories that were evident in a Japanese music video, and how these were meaningful, and how these were like little mini parables, just like how Jesus talked and taught in parables. And so um, I really, really like story or narrative driven video games because I think they're a really unique medium of storytelling. And so I want to talk about one of them in particular that I played recently. But more so just like about these kind of like experiences in general. Um, yeah. So I'm going to pull up, hopefully, if this works, it works when I tested it. You guys are going to see my screensaver for a moment. That's Ophelia in Iceland. All right, perfect. I'm hoping that it's working how I'm seeing it, and then all the audio and stuff is still working. So this is a screen from, and hopefully you can hear the music in the background, and it's not overpowering. It'll be a little atmospheric. Again, I did test it, and it seemed like it was a good level, but we'll see. This is from a game that I played recently called Detroit Become Human. And the premise of the game was there's these three, or actually it's set about 20 years in the future, and it's kind of a sci-fi. The premise is that there have been significant advances in both like kind of robots and artificial intelligence, which might be both two like scary words. I don't know. But so there are these kind of like automatous robots or androids that, and humanoid robots, are androids that like are present throughout the world, and they do a bunch of like public work, like sweeping the streets, cleaning the gutters, whatever. But then they also do stuff like they serve in the military, which is crazy, and serve in like houses as like kind of like maids and like assistants around the house. And so it's this very like it takes an idea of like, oh, how does technology work in our society and what is it going to look like, and it just like explores it a little bit. But the main premise and the reason the game is called Become Human is because the you play as three androids, three of these like hyper intelligent robots, um, that kind of break free of their programming and become kind of like uh, like sentient or like human in a sense of they get to make their own decisions and feel emotion and this, that, the other thing. And so um, one of the very interesting narratives is this idea of these robots, these androids, have been created. And so they can very directly see their creators, humans, people, right? And so um, when there are these questions about like, oh, okay, who are androids and like what are they, and like what is their purpose, what do they mean, there's two kind of things that they look at. They look at the androids and it's like, okay, well, what do the androids perceive themselves to mean? And they look at the humans, they look at the people who created the androids. um, and so it's this creator and created dynamic that emerges and that they get to explore. um, and uh, it's very interesting because it pushes a narrative of like both of these things matter, like the way you were created and the way you were designed matters, but it also argues that these are, or seems to argue that these are like they've reached the point of um like living or intelligent beings, and what they choose also matters. And I think that's really cool. um I used to hear a lot growing up about the when asked about like free will or whatever. um, I would hear that God gave us free will so that we could willfully choose to follow Him, and that all, like essentially the main or the only purpose even of our free will was to make the choice to follow God as best we could in His explicit instructions, like to a T. Like He laid out exactly what we were supposed to do, and we were supposed to follow that exactly. And everything that deviates from that is like that's not good, like that's sin, and we're just supposed to there's a right option, there's a something we're supposed to do, and our goal is to follow that. um and then and I kind of like I mostly bought into that idea, this idea that God, He's infinitely intelligent. He knows like us, He knows our circumstances, He knows that what must be, in my mind, like the best answer for any given possible situation, whatever that means, whatever that looks like. Like I don't know what is best, but I figure God does. So I figured, yeah, like there's supposed to be one thing, there's one right answer, and I'm supposed to pray and I'm supposed to read the Bible and I'm supposed to find out as best I can what in any given situation the right answer is based on what my creator created me to be. And that's what I thought, and that's what I believed. And then when I was in college, I was a freshman in college, and during our winter session, our J term, which is like a month long class in January that some colleges have in between the fall and spring semesters. I took a trip to Israel. And one of the students that went on the trip to Israel was someone I was getting to know and that I respected a lot. Um, Her name was Emily, and she was pretty much the student leader of campus ministry. And so I respected her a lot, and I was talking to her um, after our plane ride to Israel. And one of Emily's hobbies, one of the things that she delighted in, and that God created her to enjoy and thrive in, I believe, is dance. And she's done all kinds of dance, like more like pop hip hop dance, but a lot more like traditional like ballroom dancing. One of her favorites is like swing dancing. Um, and I was asking her about her flight and what God's been talking to her about, and she said that she was praying and she felt like God was telling her that um, that life with God is like a dance, right? This was how God spoke to her, because this is what she understood. And I believe God speaks to all of us this way, like whatever's meaningful to us, like, and however God created us, like God's going to speak to us as individuals. He's going to reach out, and just like Jesus used a lot of agrarian or farming analogies for like a lot of agrarian or farming people, or used fishing analogies for fishing people, or people who fish, like, not that that's their whole identity. And he used analogies about money, and even analogies about the priesthood when he's talking to these different groups of people. Or even when we can even see it in like one-on-one conversations when he's like talking to Nicodemus, like he uses analogies that are going to reach and break through to the people that he's talking to. Because God's really cool and he loves us, and like this is an amazing dynamic that he has. And so if you ever feel like there's something that you feel like God's telling you, but it's like, God wouldn't talk to me through insert whatever here. God wouldn't talk to me through my football team, or God wouldn't talk to me through, I don't know, the coffee around the water cooler at work, or God wouldn't talk to me through my gardening hobby. Like, I totally, I would generally disagree with that. And if you feel like God's speaking in that situation, then, yeah, listen and test that, if it seems weird, but I totally believe God speaks to us like this. And so God was describing to Emily, how a relationship with God is like a dance. And like in a lot of the dances that she does. And fun fact, she taught me and some friends like a lot of dance steps and whatnot on the trip, which was really cool. And so especially my friend Nikhil and I, we were both like, psh, dancing seems super cool. But we wanted to break like some norms. And so she taught us how to dance. And because she knew what she was doing and we didn't, she led, right? Because it was a lot easier for us to learning to follow the steps, and then like learning a lead rule. And then so we got to dance with her, with like her leading, and then with us leading, and then Nikhil and I got to dance together, sometimes with him leading and sometimes with me leading. And so we got to learn both sides of the dances. And we did mostly waltzing. We did a couple other like little ballroom and swing steps, which was really cool. We got to do it on a boat on the Sea of Galilee. That's my little brag. People sometimes say I look like Jesus, which isn't really true, but I look like that, like kind of Europeanized Jesus sometimes. So I can't walk on water, but I did ballroom dance across the Sea of Galilee, which is a pretty cool flex. I don't know. I think that's neat. But yeah, so long story short, God was telling her how a relationship with him is like a dance. And it's a dance that he's leading. And so he'll, take a step in a direction, and that's like a signal to the person who's following in the dance to step in that direction too. And he'll take another step. And there's the footwork, there's like the guiding hand, there's the hand around the back or shoulder or whatever. There's a lot of different points of contact or signals to the follower to say, okay, where are we going? And so even if you don't know exactly like the steps, but you have a pretty good idea, it's a lot easier to follow. And I think that's really cool. But what God was telling her is that sometimes, especially in ballroom dancing, especially if it's like for a competition or something, which was a lot of what she did, the lead will like spin or set off or let go of the person who's following. And the follower essentially has a moment where the lead's not leading them in any particular way. There's not specific steps to the dance. They get to essentially express themselves, and they get to be the lead kind of alone in this, or with a moment away from the lead of the dance. And they get to do their little steps or whatever. And I probably had a better way to phrase that when I learned about it. But there's a time when the intention of the dance is for the person who's following to be able to make their own decisions and to shine in the ways that they want to. And I'm not putting this particularly eloquently, but um, she was sharing how she had a very similar view to me of like, okay, what is the next step? And God was telling her, no, um, like I created you, I made you to be a person, to be a whole creature. Like I made you to follow me, absolutely, but I made you with wants, with passions, with meaning in your heart, with things to chase and pursue. That part of why I created you is to explore these, to practice these, to be you. Um, and part of being you, part of being made in my image, isn't just to follow me in these like very literal direct ways, but following me also means doing the things that I do, making choices, following things that you feel are significant. And so that was like her kind of revelation of the trip, was this idea that God's gonna put things that are meaningful to her in her heart. And um like part of the meaning is that she gets to choose how she follows and how she pursues that. She gets choice. She gets, the key word here is agency. She gets to choose. And that's this beauty in free will. It's not just because if we didn't have free will, then we'd just be robots. We'd just be following an exact set of instructions. And that would be like this was always portrayed to me as like, oh well, that would be cruel. No, like God just sets out these exact set of instructions and then you have to follow them, and then if you mess up, well then and that's not particularly loving in my eyes either. But um this was her revelation of, this is something that when God creates us in his image and to follow him, part of that means having these little or smaller aspects of leading, of meaning, of agency, of choice. Um, and so I thought that was really cool. And that's changed my view a lot. So when we talk about creator and created, I think it's really cool that there's absolutely intent and meaning in this idea of like the creator's will, that this is just inherently a part of who we are, of how we are made, of what we are and what we're set out to do. But if we're created with agency, if agency is a part of God's identity and we're created in his image, and that's a part of us too. And this meaning of choice, God creates us to find beauty and live that out in our lives, and not just in this like rote test memorization very singular way, but in a dynamic way where our choices matter and have a depth of results and meaning. And so in this story, in Detroit Become Human, and it takes place in Detroit. Detroit's where like a lot of the Android advancements happened, and that's why it's called Detroit Become Human. They explore this idea of meaning, of creator, and the meaning of the creative, and the choices that both of them make. And that's really cool, and it gets to explore the identity of these created, both in relation to their creator and then as individuals. And that's super cool. And one of the aspects of this game that was really neat is in the menu, in like the loading screen, when you first open the game on like the main menu, there's an android, and they're talking to you, and they're like, hey, like this is how you play the game or whatever, this is how you go and look at your choices or whatever. And after you play for a while, when you go to exit the game, the android will stop you and it'll say, hey, do you have time for a survey? And you can say yes or no, but if you say yes, then it gives you 10 questions. And these questions are all about pretty much like the role of technology, and especially about like androids, right? Or these like very advanced humanoid robots. And so like this next one over here, this next question, 7 out of 13, is would you let an android, I think, take care of your like watch your children, which might be a really scary answer. I know one of them is, would you? Oh, actually, this one I think is, yeah. Would you let an android take care of your children? And one of them is, if you needed emergency surgery, would you agree to be operated on by a machine? My answer for this was yes. And I've looked at this quite a bit, especially because I really like VR, and I've seen how they use VR to train surgeons and stuff like that, which is neat. And or like they can use machines as like proxies, so there's like a human controlling the machine that's actually doing the work, because then they can be a lot more precise than like a shaky hand. Um, but there's also more that are like that can, process and see, take in information, and then process out a result and output, and perform surgeries like that, which is really also really neat. Um, and so this is, yeah. So it's just questions like this, and it asks anyone who agrees, and then it'll tell you what the percentage of people around the world answered. And this game came out in 2018. So it's been out for 5 years, and I would imagine that mostly, to think about our survey population here, the people who actually answered these questions, because it's not, no, not everybody in the world answered these. It's probably like people between the age of, I don't know, like 15 and 30, or maybe 15 and 35 that are answering this question, or answering these questions. And it's probably people that like video games and technology, and it's probably people that like sci-fi, so they might like an optimistic or maybe even a scary view of technology in the future. So that's always something important to keep in mind. So maybe the world's population would not be 68% yes to this question. Or this one is, would you let an android take care of your children? I said yes, and this is like me thinking about future, which is crazy, and I don't know if I agree with myself on this as I'm looking back, but this was one of the questions: is do you believe in God? And I thought that was really interesting, and I'm really glad that they put that in this like sci-fi game, where choices matter. And again, this demographic is probably about like 15 to 35-year-olds of people who play video games, like technology, and like sci-fi. So this is a very specific subset of the population. But in answers to this, 50% of the people said no. And when these have shifted slightly. I think it was 51% when I made my answer 2 weeks ago. Whoa, pardon me. So 50% of the population that answered this survey doesn't believe in God, or said that they didn't. And 32% said yes. Again, I thought this was interesting. And I thought it was really cool that they added this as a question in this idea of creator and created. And I've seen this come up a lot as we have a lot of discussions around technology. It's amazing how we circle back into these like philosophical questions about like God, about creators, about life. Like, what is the nature of life? What gives it life? What, all of these, right? And so this is one of the questions that they included, which I think is super cool. And 50% might seem a scary answer. It might seem a surprising answer. It may not seem surprising or scary at all. I don't know. But I think it's super easy. For the church leadership always says the mission of the church is to make disciples for the transformation of the world. And there's something I think in there about the direction of like God's kingdom and God's love. But so if that's our mission, if that's the mission of the church, to make disciples for the transformation of the world and love people, then 50% might be a discouraging number. 32% yes might be a also scary or discouraging number. But this is the number of that I want us to think about or focus on. 18% of people who answered this survey said that they don't know. And when we reach out, there's always going to be amazing stories about people who maybe grew up in the church and they believe that there's a God, but they walked away from the church. Lives fell into whatever, whether that looks dramatic or not, and then they came back and it's like, woo. What's his name? The two sons, the prodigal son, right? Prodigal son returns, wonderful. And then we're also gonna have dramatic stories about, devout atheist, comes into a church and then goes, hey, whoa, maybe this makes sense, right? But these aren't going to be the majority of our stories or the majority of our encounters. And we've done a lot of work with MLI and with various other things to look at the population of Hickory, of Chesapeake, of the populations of the people around us. And what I want us to think about is that 18% of people that said that they don't know. I think that's awesome. I think this means that there are 18% of people out there that are going, this is a question that I don't have an answer to. I haven't come to a negative conclusion. I haven't really come to a positive one either. What does this mean? And so probably not all 18% of this population is interested in finding out an answer. They may even react negatively to somebody trying to suggest it one way or another. But I'd say, I don't know, maybe I'd say between 5 to 10% of this total population probably really wants to know. I think when we find people that are in that group of they don't know, and there's also, I don't remember if this survey touches on it, but something that we're finding out whenever surveys like this go out is that people are feeling more isolated, more disconnected, more meaningless than ever before. I was just looking at a study that showed millennials having the worst mental health of like any recorded previous generation, which I don't know, think what you want about that or whatever, but this world that we're living in, it's not necessarily one that always, promotes a holistic meaning and joy. And I think that's maybe starting to turn, I don't know. But there's people that are feeling isolated, that have questions, that don't know how they feel about God. They probably don't have a background in him. And that are looking for connection. They're looking for relationship. They're looking for answers. And like that's our, I don't know, like target audience, or those are people we can reach. Which this may not seem very much like a prayer at all, which totally makes sense. But the wonderful thing is that prayer is just conversation with God. And I repeatedly get told, especially in counseling, that I am a very analytical person, or very like maybe logically or reason minded, but our prayers can look like anything. Our prayers can look like talking to God about survey results in a video game about super advanced humanoid robots, which is wild. But that's amazing. Like, this is part of the way that God reaches out to us and that God connects with us. It can be through talking about dance, and it can be through talking about video games or robots or gardening or fishing or whatever. And that's awesome. Like, all of it is prayer, and all of it is like it doesn't have to look like a book study. It doesn't have to look like reading the Bible. Those are both wonderful things. Do book studies, read the Bible. It's a great thing to do. And also delight in the things that God created you to delight in. Like, these are things that I believe that he put in our hearts, that we get to embrace, that we get to find out more about ourselves, about the people around us, and about him when we engage with them. And so when I get to play a game, or when I get to read a book, I've been listening to an audiobook series that's like a fantasy series, but I get to learn more about people because an author, a human, a child of God wrote this book, and I get to see his insights into the world. And another person read the book, they read it and performed it, and I get to see what flavor and spin they put on things as I listen to it. And all of that reveals things about them as human beings, which reveals the nature of God, which is so cool. And that's what I got. I don't know. I just think it's so neat. So let me see if I can put a grand. That's what I think is cool, and I'm grateful that you let me share. Not that you had a choice. Well, I guess you could have left, but nobody could stop me because this is a pre-recorded video. Haha. I need to do my laundry. Anyways, yeah. So these stories, these games where I get to interact with something that was made by children of God, it helps me understand how God made me, and it helps me see and think and process things in a way that like reveals things to me. And that's really cool. And so I always encourage, whether it's, you know, a nonfiction Bible study, or whether it's, you know, realistic or historical fiction, or the most wild fantasy sci-fi thing out there, like stories are what God has used for thousands of years to talk to his people. And I think that's going to continue to change forms, but I don't think that's ever going to stop. I think that we're a people of story, of narrative. I think that's part of how he made us. And so I don't know. Part of our prayer is stories. And we don't have to put God in a box of, you know, our 15-minute devotional, or asking for wisdom, or thanking him for the things in our life. Those are all wonderful and good. Don't hear me say otherwise. But I don't know. It's just such a wonderful dynamic view of what prayer can be. So let's pray. Continue to pray. It's all prayer. God's good, and he's really cool. All right. God, thank you. Thanks for the chance to pray. Thanks for the chance to pray before we start our days, as we go down to bed, as we're making breakfast, as we're looking out our window, as we're playing with our dog, as we're calling our kids, as we're going to work, as we're sitting around the water cooler or in the lounge or whatever, as we're going to pick up couches and bring them into the youth room. Thanks again, Joe King. As we're doing gardening, as we're listening to our favorite music, as we're listening to a podcast or watching TV, as we're going to the movies, as we're reading a book, as we're doing a Bible study, as we're showing up to meet with people, to go to coffee shops, or go to a restaurant and talk and see all the people around, see all of your children, and just how they're living in these little tiny snapshots of you, God, of your image. And so I pray that we have a little bit of mindfulness in our prayers while we're dancing, and while we're playing video games, or while we're going to gymnastics practice, or just sitting and watching the birds. I thank you for how you reveal yourself and your children to us. I thank you for stories, and I thank you for loving us enough to create us in such beautiful ways, and for loving us enough to pursue us in the beautiful lives that you open up for us. So thank you. In your name, amen. Cool. I will see you all. Thank you so much.